Zainab bint Ali is my name. I'm 42 years old and I reside in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I am a respected member of my community, a wife, and the mother of 2 lovely children. I'm a beautician by profession. I cherish my family, and I've always held the belief that a good life entails upholding the virtues of kindness, integrity, and faith. I had always had a strong religious commitment. I grew up in loving Muslim homes with my spouse, Omar. Together we prayed, we went to the mosque every Friday and fasted during Ramadan, helping people in need and leading a life that demonstrated our commitment to Allah. We were involved in our community. I never imagined, however, how profoundly my convictions would be put to the test, or how far I would be pushed beyond my comprehension, even in our faith. I was finally given the chance to do the Hajj, the most significant spiritual pilgrimage of my life, in 2021. My desire had always been to travel to Mecca for this trip. I had grown up hearing tales of the profound metamorphosis people underwent upon entering the sacred city. I sensed the seriousness of the situation. It was an overwhelming chance to stand on the Arafat plains, perform the tawaf, pray at the Kaaba, and join millions of other Muslims in a moment of dedication and solidarity. I thought that by strengthening my religion and feeling of purpose, this journey would bring me even closer to Allah. I spent years getting ready for this. I made sure to save as much money as possible, possessed the money to travel. Omar, my spouse, helped me along the journey. He could sense the desire to follow in the Prophet Muhammad's footsteps and the fire in my eyes. Although our 11 and 13-year-old children were too young to go with me, they saw that this was a religious obligation I had to carry out. The day came. With a heart full of hope and expectation, I boarded the journey to Saudi Arabia. Excitement permeated the air. There were countless pilgrims with tales to tell. We all had the same beliefs and were traveling to the same place. When I got there, I had no idea what to anticipate. I had never seen or heard anything like the sights and noises of Mecca. It was astonishing how many people there were. There were Muslims from all over the world in every part of the metropolis. In addition to being amazed, I felt a little intimidated. For me, this was more than just a trip. It was the realization of a long-held dream. However, I had no idea that this trip would lead me down a path I could never have predicted. One that would upend my entire universe, alter my beliefs, and make me face the most challenging and sinister realities of my life. The initial days spent in Mecca were a haze. We prayed, carried out the rites, and experienced the place's tremendous spiritual weight. Then, something occurred. Something I never would have imagined. Something that continues to haunt my thoughts. I had received warnings about the pilgrimage's risks, the throng, the heat, and the fatigue. All of them were actual dangers. The pilgrimage was physically taxing, and I was especially at risk since I was a woman. In the middle of the pilgrimage's pandemonium, there were accusations of sexual assaults and targeting of women. Women were urged to remain in groups and pay great attention to their surroundings. Although this was not always feasible, they were frequently silenced or disregarded. The fatigue began to get to me as the days passed. The physical strain of the Hajj had left my body exhausted, but my spirit was in the air. Being surrounded by like-minded individuals made me feel like I was a part of something bigger than myself. Darker forces, however, were also at work. Forces I didn't completely comprehend until it was too late, and forces I couldn't have predicted. Something that would permanently alter the trajectory of my life occurred on the 7th day of the trek. Mecca was oppressively hot, and the throng appeared to grow larger by the hour. Although it should have been consoling, the millions of pilgrims' sense of solidarity only served to heighten the overpowering sensation of powerlessness. There were a lot of eyes, sounds, and people. It was almost impossible for me to move without getting bumped. In the middle of the turmoil, I could hardly find any peace. I had always taken great satisfaction in my strength. I had already conquered a number of challenging obstacles in my life, including a challenging upbringing, financial difficulties, and health issues. I believed that I was ready for anything. The pilgrimage, however, was distinct. Of course, I had heard the stories of women who had been harassed, beaten, or worse. However, I never thought I would experience it. I used caution. I remained with my group, lowered my head, and maintained my focus on my prayers, and made an effort to ignore the commotion around me. However, the world changed beneath my feet one fateful afternoon. It began in a section of the mosque that was packed. To finish our tawaf, we were all attempting to approach the Kaaba, the mosque's holiest section. The air was heavy with the smell of incense and sweat, and people were shoving and pushing. Despite my painful feet from the constant walking, I continued to move even though I could hardly breathe. Then, an unwanted hand brushed against my side, causing me to feel the first odd touch. I initially believed it to be the crowd, but it kept happening. The hand stayed this time, and I could feel its pressure. I whirled around, but saw nothing. An ocean of faces. They were all preoccupied with their own work and prayers. However, I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling. I felt another hand grasp me before I could fully comprehend what had happened. I went cold. I was immobile. I was unable to yell. I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare with no way out, and the entire world seemed to be spinning. Even though it was only a moment, it seemed to last forever. There was movement in the throng. No one paid any attention to the people pressing past me. The attack went unnoticed. There was only the sound of the mob and the crushing weight of bodies, no protection or assistance. I stood there, stunned and out of breath when it was all over. Later, the tears came. At one point, I was by myself in the tiny motel room we were given. I was trembling all the time. I felt abused, filthy, and completely helpless. How could I have experienced this? How could this happen on the most meaningful journey of my life, in the most sacred spot on earth? I kept it a secret. Not my spouse, not my fellow travelers. I was unable to. I was too broken and too ashamed. How could I tell anyone this without feeling like a failure? As a Muslim woman, the humiliation was intolerable. Nevertheless, I knew deep inside that I couldn't keep quiet. It was more than just me. It was about all the women who had experienced the same thing and were unable to express their opinions. The Mosque Me Too movement had just started to take off. However, I had heard the tales of silently attacked women who received neither justice nor assistance. Still, I remained silent. It was impossible for me to do so. I was too damaged and too scared. All I wanted was to complete the pilgrimage and get back to my family and the security of the life I had created. However, I couldn't get rid of the sense that something was seriously amiss with the world itself, not simply with what had happened to me. I started to feel a weird illness developing inside of me as the days went by. My body ached from fatigue, and I had been feeling queasy, but I put it down to the physical toll, the heat, and the stress of the pilgrimage. Everything was too much to handle. However, it dawned on me that the illness was more than just physical fatigue. There was more going on. Anything more profound. I was expecting a child. I was aware of the problem long before I could admit it. The weird pains, the nausea, and the lightheadedness. I couldn't describe the way my body was responding. I was also too scared to admit it. I was unwilling to confront the reality. I didn't want to consider what may have occurred if that terrible experience had resulted in a child. However, I was aware of what had transpired. Like a tidal wave, the realization struck me. I was unable to avoid it because I was pregnant. My heart shattered into a million tiny fragments. Every step felt heavier, even though I wanted to remain strong and keep moving forward. Under these conditions, how could I become a parent? How could I not be reminded of the horrors I had experienced when I looked at this pregnancy? I was aware of the proper course of action. I had to inform Omar. I had to inform my relatives. However, the embarrassment was oppressive. Telling them what had happened and what had been done to me was too painful for me. I couldn't tell them that the spot where I believed I was closest to Allah was where my entire universe had fallen apart. My faith, my family, and myself were all betrayed, and it seemed like the ultimate betrayal. I needed to survive the pilgrimage. I needed to complete what I had begun. But the weight of my predicament grew increasingly intolerable with every day that went by. The shame, the anxiety, and the nausea were too much to bear. Then, an unforeseen event occurred. I found myself by myself in the desert at the location where pilgrims go to perform the Arafat ritual, surrounded by fatigue, grief, and terror. Our faces were turned to Allah as we stood there in prayer, pleading for His pardon and mercy. As I closed my eyes and fervently prayed, I sensed a change in the atmosphere. There was no sound. It was a presence rather than a movement, a presence I was unable to describe. Then everything turned dark. The feeling of floating was the first thing that came to mind once everything turned black. I had never experienced anything like it before. Not sleep, not a dream. It seemed as though my soul was all that was left of my body. There was only boundless space and a weightless serenity that enveloped me like a blanket. There was no up, no down, and no time. I sensed a presence in this great limitless space, not just any presence, but one that was so strong and overwhelming that I was unable to fully appreciate its scope. It was an expression of unadulterated affection, a love so profound that it permeated every part of me. It was more than a sensation. It was the very core of the love, something that is incomprehensible to humans. I could taste it, smell it, and feel it. I knew I wasn't alone, even though at first I couldn't see anything. The area surrounding me gradually started to change, and a gentle light started to emerge. It was warm, soft, and brilliant, yet not blinding. Then a tall, noble man with an inexplicable light shining on his face appeared in front of me. Despite his caring and kind features, he exuded authority. I had never seen that figure before, but I knew him right away from something inside of me. Jesus was the one. I never thought I'd meet him, never thought this would happen. I had always been taught that Jesus was a holy man and a prophet, but I sensed a change in my emotions at that precise instant. In his presence, he was more than just a forerunner. He was the rescuer, the Son of God. Deep within me, I sensed the overwhelming truth of it. His voice resonated, not just in my ears, but in my very being as he talked without using words. "Zainab," he remarked in a soft yet firm voice, "you have lost a lot and endured a lot of pain, but I am here to tell you the truth." My eyes filled with tears as I gazed at him. Talking and moving are impossible. I simultaneously felt entire and broken. I felt his affection, but there was also a melancholy, a knowing grief in his eyes. He seemed to comprehend the extent of my suffering, the inner turmoil, and the anxiety that had taken hold of my heart. "There have been many challenges along the way," he remarked, "but you will discover the way to truth in your pain. You will learn about me via your brokenness." I was unable to answer. The words stopped in my throat, even though I wanted to talk and ask a lot of questions. My heart hurts from misunderstanding and want. I had always thought that the only truth was what I considered to be true in Islam. I had dutifully followed the path of honoring Prophet Muhammad as Allah's last messenger. However, I experienced something so pure and unquestionable in Jesus' presence that it completely upended everything I had previously understood. Then, suddenly, the area around us changed once more. As the brilliant light faded, I was transported to another location that seemed lifeless, frigid, and far away. It was shadowy and dark. All I could make out was a huge void. Nevertheless, I sensed a sinister presence lingering in the emptiness. Jesus turned to face me, grief in his eyes. "Look at this, Zainab." The shadows surrounding me suddenly parted, revealing a vision. I observed a bunch of little toddlers, all of them small with serene expressions but lifeless, limp bodies. They had never had a shot at life. They were newborns, helpless, frail creatures. Then I noticed more. Millions, hundreds, thousands of infants. their souls floating away, dead in the emptiness. My heart broke. I could feel the weight of their loss pushing down on my chest because the pain was so genuine and severe. Before they had ever been given the chance to live, these kids were gone. I didn't comprehend. I had no idea what or why I was experiencing this. Jesus then spoke once more, but this time there was a great grief in his voice. These are the kids who were never given the opportunity to learn the truth. These are the lost souls, Zainab. Some passed away before they were able to make their own decisions. Others were never given the chance to hear the good news of redemption. I muttered in confusion, "Salvation, as though the earth were giving way under me." He nodded, compassion shining in his eyes. "Through me, Zainab, salvation is possible. They will track down the Father through me. I am the one who can save everyone." My chest constricted as the knowledge hit in, and I experienced a wave of emotions. This wasn't merely about the suffering I had gone through or about my personal pain. There was a far bigger reality here, a reality that transcended the limitations I had imposed on my faith. Then everything was different. The baby's vision dimmed, and the surrounding darkness changed once more. However, I wasn't by myself this time. In the distance, I noticed another individual, someone I didn't think I'd see. Prophet Muhammad was the one. His face was composed and knowledgeable, and his body was magnificent. However, something within of me stirred as I gazed at him. He wasn't as tall as I had thought he would be. Rather, I sensed a great grief coming from him, as though he was aware of something I was not. His eyes were soft as he walked gently toward me, yet they had a depth that was difficult to understand. "Zainab," he stated in a forceful yet gentle voice, "you have been aware of my teachings and have assiduously adhered to them. However, you have to comprehend something. The route you have traveled is not the last one. Beyond it is the truth you're looking for." My heart was thumping in my chest as I stood motionless. Although I could feel the weight of what he was saying, I was unable to fully understand it. How could he, the prophet I had, inform me that my course was not the only one to take? How could he claim that my faith, the faith that had guided me throughout my life, was false? He went on, his words kind but piercing me like a blade. "I am not the one to show you the way. Jesus, the one who sent me, is the source of the truth you seek, not just what I say." The words resonated deeply within me, causing the ground underneath me to quake. It all hit me like a storm of overpowering truth. Jesus' love, the truth he revealed to me, and the heavenly presence that had encircled me, all of which suggested something much bigger than I could have ever dreamed. I sensed Jesus' coming as the Prophet Muhammad's vision dimmed, his arms spread wide, his eyes inviting and full of love. "Come to me, Zainab," he murmured in a gentle yet firm voice. "Come, and I will show you the way." I felt conflicted. My familiar faith and the principles that had served as my compass were being put to the ultimate test. I was now doubting everything I had ever believed. But in the midst of the anguish and confusion, I was confident of one thing at the time. There was no denying the veracity of Jesus' love. I had been looking for this truth all along. I was out of breath when I woke up from the vision. I felt as though the information I had just been exposed to had put a burden on my body. Like an unwanted stranger, the hospital room's clean white walls welcomed me. I had returning to the starting point when everything had gone wrong. I wasn't the same, though. No more. My body was still hurting, a persistent aching that persisted, but I was overcome by the anguish in my heart. Like a fire that would not go out, the truth I had witnessed during that holy experience was burning through me. I had seen the lost souls, the newborns. I had experienced their anguish and emptiness, and I had viewed Jesus as the Savior and the Son of God, not just a prophet. However, how could I make sense of this new reality in light of my past life? How did I come to believe that the principles I had lived by my entire life were not the ultimate truth? How could I reject the faith that had been a pillar of my life and that had been handed down through the generations? The questions whirled about me like a tempest as I lay there in the hospital bed. It seemed as though every belief I had held onto for years was being shattered in front of my eyes, and my mind was being torn apart. I was unable to understand it. Everything I had known was at odds with the love I had experienced from Jesus and the overpowering conviction that he was the truth. However, the more I made an effort to ignore the thoughts, the more persistent they grew. I could still clearly see Prophet Muhammad's love, truth, caution, and sorrow in his eyes told me that the path I had taken was not the last one. It never occurred to me that my faith, my beliefs, would clash in this manner. I had never questioned my faith despite growing up in America, surrounded by people of many faiths. Islam served as both my identity and my basis. My parents had taught me the importance of prayer, faith, and the lessons found in the Quran. I was raised to believe that Prophet Muhammad was Allah's last prophet, and that Allah was the one real God. Now, however, everything was different. Life, death, and salvation were being rewritten in my mind. I was unable to deny what I had witnessed. I couldn't act as though Jesus wasn't real. I could still feel his love encircling me and drawing me in. However, I was also unable to resist the allure of my previous religion. I had two different universes in my heart, and I had no idea how to reconcile them. I made an effort to get back to my regular schedule in the days that followed. I went to the mosque, fasted, and prayed. But every time, I experienced a profound sense of emptiness. The prayers didn't seem sincere. The ceremonies are robotic. Not because I didn't think. I still had faith, but I had changed in some way. I was unable to deny what I had witnessed. The reality that had been shown to me during that miraculous meeting was something I could never forget. I felt scared at the same time, worried about the consequences of accepting this new reality. I'm scared of what my friends, family, and community would think about me. I was aware of the consequences of leaving Islam. I would be rejected if I abandoned everything I had ever known. They'd call me an apostate. Everything would be lost. My place in the world, my relationships, and who I am. The terror was incapacitating. The pressure to fit in was oppressive. I was unable to discuss what I had gone through with anyone. Nobody would comprehend. But I would kneel and pray at night in the privacy of my room. Prayers to Jesus, not the ones I had learned in the mosque. Simple, gentle prayers that seek direction and clarity. And every time, the room would be filled with his presence. The fury inside me was calmed by a tender, overwhelming affection. One of those evenings I was praying when I experienced a wave of calmness, something that had been a mystery to me for days. I didn't have to know everything at once. Everything didn't have to make sense to me. The truth had been shown to me, and all I had to do was follow it. I decided as a result, wherever the truth led me, I would pursue it, even if it included leaving everything I knew behind. I refused to let fear control my decisions anymore. I contacted a Christian acquaintance I'd known for years the following day. I trusted her more than anyone else in my life because I knew she had always prayed for me. I needed her assistance now, but I had never told her about the vision or what I had seen. As I started this new trip, I needed a companion. She didn't stop me as I told her what had happened, but her eyes grew sympathetic and understanding. "I've always prayed for you, Zainab," she added quietly. "I'm here for you no matter what, and I've always hoped that you'll realize the reality." Her remarks hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I belonged for the first time since the vision. I wasn't alone myself. I wasn't insane. Someone would be there to support me on this unfamiliar and uncertain journey. Someone who understood. Despite her encouragement, I was aware that the path ahead would be challenging. I was aware that I would encounter hatred, rejection, and mockery. Not many people could comprehend the route I was now on. I would have to travel this path by myself, at least for a while, and it was one of metamorphosis and rebirth. However, I felt at ease and confident that I was headed in the right direction when I knelt down to pray that evening. I didn't know where it would take me. However, I was aware of one thing. I could no longer deny that the truth had come to light. The next few days were a haze. When I would have to face the world outside of my home, I would wake up with a heavy heart. The vision I had saw was still consuming my thoughts. More than that, though, it was characterized by the deepening awareness that my life had altered forever. I had changed from who I was before. I was unable to return to my previous life. I was unable to return to the mosque. Not with what I now knew inside my heart. I was unable to sit in prayer circles with my friends and act as though nothing had changed. I felt alienated from the faith that I had once known so well. Every prayer and Quranic passage seemed meaningless, unrelated to the profound reality I had experienced in that vision. I would open the Bible my buddy gave me in the silence of my flat. I had kept it on my shelf for years, but I had never opened it, thinking it was just another work of fiction. However, I now was in dire need of clarification. I would read slowly, giving each word more significance. I would close my eyes and allow Jesus' teachings to fill me with an inner serenity I had never experienced before. I am the truth, the life, and the path. I would cry as his words appeared to reverberate in my spirit, but the loneliness grew with every tear. I was aware that I couldn't speak to my relatives. If my parents realized what I was going through, they would be devastated. They had always taken pride in my fervent devotion to Islam and my strong religion. It would break their hearts to tell them now, and it would destroy everything I knew. In a moment, the identity they had given me would be gone. I was unable to share the vision with them. The love I experienced and the indisputable truth that Jesus had revealed to me were beyond my comprehension. They wouldn't comprehend. They would never comprehend. I therefore retreated. I ignored my Muslim friends and stopped going to the mosque. I always excused myself whenever someone called to see how I was doing. I was worn out. I had a lot of work to do. There was no one I wanted to interact with. However, the isolation was intolerable. Never in my life have I felt so isolated. The community I had once considered home was no longer a part of me. The sense of belonging that had been so reassuring was gone. My mother sent me a message one evening while I was sitting in my apartment looking at the Bible. She was worried about me. She had observed that I hadn't been returning her calls or attending the mosque. "Is everything okay?" she asked. For what seemed like hours, I sat there with my fingertips hovering over the screen. How could I respond? How could I be honest with her without ruining everything? How could I explain that I was no longer on the same path that Mom had nurtured me in, the faith, that she had shown me so much love and care for? Ultimately, I lied in my response. "Mom, I'm all right. I've simply been a little overburdened by work. Inshallah, I'll be all right." Like a suffocating mist, the untruth hovered in the atmosphere. However, there was no alternative. Not quite yet, but it was getting harder and harder to keep the truth from coming out. Inside of me, it was like a fire, burning more intensely each day. I couldn't hide this indefinitely. I couldn't continue to act as though nothing was wrong. I started praying more, but not in the same manner as before. I stopped attending the Islamic prayers. I stopped reciting the Quran the way I had been instructed to do. Those routines no longer offered me calm, therefore I had to give them up. I prayed to Jesus instead. I would sit quietly and allow his presence to permeate the space as I prayed for strength and direction. And I had a change and a feeling of clarity at one of these peaceful times. This was not something I was meant to keep to myself. I wasn't meant to hide from my community or family. It was my duty to tell the truth that had been shown to me. I was beginning to feel less afraid of being rejected and alone than I had before. I understood that I would not have an easy journey. It would be difficult, painful, and full of loss. However, it was the route I was supposed to take. I therefore made the decision to start. I was no longer able to hide. It was not long before the storm started. I felt relieved, as if the burden of my silence had been removed when I decided to speak my truth. However, I was also aware that the path ahead would be challenging. I was already beginning to feel out of place in the neighborhood. I sensed it in the way my family seemed to turn away from me, and in the suspicious looks my friends gave me. My best friend, Ila, was the first person I told. We'd experienced every stage of life together, from school to spiritual turning points. I had hoped she would understand that we had always been close. It would be impossible for me to go through this path without her help. One afternoon, we sat in a peaceful cafe where the subtle hum of background conversation and the clinking of coffee cups filled the air. I curled my trembling hands over my cup and stared at her. Searching for the right words, I started, my voice trembling a little. Ila, I have something to share with you, something I can no longer contain. She knitted her brows in worry. What's wrong, Zainab? Lately you've been aloof. You have not been who you are. I understand, I muttered, and I want you to understand why. It has to do with my Hajj vision. Her eyes grew wide with bewilderment. What are you saying? Which vision? I inhaled deeply, mustering all my bravery. Jesus was there. I never expected to see him like this. Ila, he revealed the truth to me. The truth about Muhammad, life, salvation, and everything else. Furthermore, I now understand that Islam is not the only source of truth. Jesus is. We were silent for a long time. The impact of what I said appeared to suffocate and loom thick in the air. Ila reclined on her seat, her face unreadable. Are you implying that you no longer adhere to Islam? She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as though she was having trouble believing what she was hearing. My throat constricted with emotion as I nodded. I can't deny what I witnessed. I can't deny my feelings. The truth, the way, and the life are all found in Jesus. In my entire life, I have never experienced such love and tranquility. Ila, it's true. It's more genuine than anything I've ever experienced. She knocked back her chair and jumped up. No, Zainab, you're not this person. You're advocating for us to give up all our families have taught us and held dear. You claim to have rejected your culture, identity, and religion. How are you able to... Even so, how can you say this? She stepped back and shook her head when I tried to touch her. Zainab, I can't do this. I am unable to attend this. I was left alone in the cafe with my heart in shatters as she turned and left. I anticipated this. Although I had anticipated rejection, I was unaware of the extent of the hurt. Ila was my closest friend, the one person I thought would understand, and yet, in that moment, she turned her back on me. For the rest of the day, I wandered aimlessly through the streets, consumed by the crushing weight of the decision I had made. My heart ached, not just from the loss of a friend, but from the awareness that this was just the beginning. If I had lost her, what about my family, my community, my entire identity? That night, as I sat in my apartment, the loneliness began to creep in around me. I could feel the loneliness creeping in, a thick, suffocating cloud that seemed to engulf everything in its path. The calls from my family had stopped. My former buddies had been sending me fewer and fewer messages till they stopped. I was now a social outcast. However, I sensed something else growing inside of me, even as the weight of rejection weighed heavily on me, a feeling of tranquility and direction. I knew I was walking in the truth in spite of everything. I wasn't lost. I was located. I started preparing for the impending conflict with my family in the days that followed. I realized I had to stop keeping this a secret. No matter how unpleasant it might be, the time had come to tell them the truth. I prayed for hours, begging Jesus to give me the courage and strength to maintain my faith, and I was more aware of his presence than ever during those silent times. I was reminded that I was not alone by his love, which enveloped me like a cozy hug. The day finally arrived when I gathered, despite the fact that it felt like the world was abandoning me, the bravery to have a conversation with my folks. For weeks, they had been waiting for me to return home, but I had stayed away from them out of concern for their response. I was forced to confront them now. My hands were shaking in my lap as I sat at the dining table across from them. My mother's brow was wrinkled as she gave me a worried look. "What is wrong with you, Zainab? You have been aloof. You've been staying away from us. Is everything okay?" I inhaled deeply before seeing their eyes. "I must share something with you. Anything of great importance. It has to do with my faith." My mother's face grew tired and my father's hardened. "By faith, what do you mean?" "Zainab, you've always been a nice Muslim. You've been so loyal all along," fighting back the tears that tried to fall. I muttered, "I know. However, I can no longer keep this inside. Jesus is, in my opinion, the way, the truth, and the life. Islam is no longer something I believe in. Christ is the one I believe in." There was silence for a while. My parents looked at me like I had just said something in a language they didn't understand. My mother's eyes were filled with amazement and incredulity, and my father's jaw tightened. My father remarked, "You've lost your mind," in a chilly tone. "We did not raise this daughter. You are abandoning everything that has been positive and has sustained our family. You can't be sincere." I said, "I am serious," in a shaky but forceful voice. "I have witnessed the reality. I have experienced the genuineness of Jesus' love. I can no longer ignore it." My mom started crying and her face sagged. "Please don't do this, Zainab. Don't turn away from us, please. We have sacrificed all for your faith and future. How is it possible to discard all of that?" Even though I knew I couldn't go back, the weight of their suffering was nearly too much to bear. Not right now. Not after everything I had experienced and witnessed. I whispered, "I love you both, but I can't deny reality. I have to take the route I think is right, even if I know it will hurt." The worst days of my life were the ones that followed my confession. I had hoped that facing my parents would provide some closure, but it has just made our differences more evident. The home seemed quieter and colder, as if everything had been destroyed by a storm. I was troubled by my mother's cries. My conscience was troubled by the guilt of witnessing her broken, and her anguish over what she saw as my rejection of all she had taught me. She had raised me with love and dedication, teaching me the principles of our church for a large portion of her life, and she never dreamed that I would abandon it all. And I was very wounded by my father's rage, and the icy tone of his remark broke my heart, since I had never seen Dad so disappointed in me. However, the more I considered it, the more I saw that their suffering was due to their inability to comprehend my decision to follow this road rather than my rejection of them. They believed that I was abandoning everything they had fought for and given up for me in the future. It felt like I was discarding all they had given me, including their love, faith, and culture. I got more calls and texts from friends and family as the weeks went by, each one brimming with worry, rage, or perplexity. While some were denouncing me for my decision, others were begging me to convert back to Islam. But despite their best efforts, nobody was able to persuade me to go back. In the silence I would sit in my room and pray while holding my Bible, which was my only comfort. On sometimes, I would sense Jesus' love enveloping me like a cozy blanket, and I was aware that I wasn't alone throughout those times. His love outweighed the hurt of being rejected by my family and the loneliness that felt like it would overwhelm me. Even still, there were times when I questioned whether I had made the correct decision. Was losing all I knew worth it? Was the suffering of being cut off from the people I had previously trusted and loved worth it? On some nights, when I had to face the brutal reality of my circumstances, I would cry silently and uncontrollably. But I always got the same response when I asked myself those questions. It was worthwhile indeed. I was unable to ignore what I had witnessed. The love I experienced in Jesus' presence was too strong to ignore. No one else could have showed me what he had, a reality that went beyond what I had previously understood, and it was worth every penny to know the reality. As time went on, I started interacting with other Christians who had followed the same route as myself. It wasn't simple. Additionally, a lot of them had experienced rejection from their communities, families, and traditions. However, Christ had given them strength, comfort, and serenity. They had discovered a new family within the Christian community. I became a member of a tiny, friendly Christian church in my neighborhood. They exhibited no interest in my background, my experience, or the difficulties I had encountered. They merely helped me deepen my religion and embraced me for who I was. They became my new family, and I felt like I belonged anywhere for the first time in months. At first, it was difficult. On some days, I would feel the burden of my past life bearing down on me while I sat in church. The moments I spent praying at the mosque, the memories of my family, and the sense of belonging I once experienced, now it all seemed so far away. But I became more steadfast in my faith every day. I discovered how to accept my new identity and my new existence as an acceptance of who I was destined to be, rather than as a rejection of who I had been. I had an epiphany one Sunday while listening to the preacher talk about forgiveness and grace from the church pews. For the first time, I realized that Jesus died for more than simply me. He gave his life for everyone. He loved everyone, including my family and others who rejected me and didn't understand why I had chosen this route, and he was giving them the same kindness and forgiveness that he had shown me. I experienced a deep sense of calm at that precise moment. My spirit seemed to have been freed of a great burden. I was aware that discovering the truth for myself was not the only goal of my voyage. Sharing the truth with everyone, including my family and those who rejected me, was the goal. I prayed for them to see the reality that I had witnessed and for their hearts to be opened. It was not going to be an easy journey. I was aware that I would experience periods of uncertainty, suffering, and disorientation. However, I was also aware that I was no longer alone on this journey. Every step of the journey was guided by Jesus, who was at my side. I had lost a lot of things, including my family, friends, and position in the neighborhood where I used to live. However, I had acquired something much more valuable in the process. I had discovered the truth. I was at peace. I had discovered my mission. And that was ultimately worth it all.